I'm going to try to make the case, we're going to try to make the case that it's actually not boring at all. And that actually how we analyze the financial system, how we think about the role of finance in contemporary capitalism, is actually incredibly important for how we orient as socialists politically. And that it's not just a matter of boring details and technical information about the internal functioning of finance, but it actually has a profoundly important implication for how we think of our political task and how we assess the conjuncture that we're in. So the book traces what we call the fall and rise of American finance, from the collapse of the great finance capital empire of the robber baron J.P. Morgan, all the way through the rise of the big three asset management companies following the 2008 crisis, State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard, to become the most powerful institutions in the contemporary financial system. And we wanted to especially challenge the idea that is so pervasive on the left. In fact, it's all but common sense. And you hear it from political figures ranging from Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn all the way to Hillary Clinton and even, of course, Donald Trump. That finance is somehow parasitic on industry. That finance drains, the rise of finance comes at the expense of industrial capital. That it has been, the period in which finance has become hegemonic has been one in which industrial capital has become weaker, and that the capitalist system is falling apart, and that we're in kind of late stage of capitalism. And as we try to show in the book, that is actually close to the opposite of the case. And in fact, capitalism is strong, and that is incredibly important for us to reckon with as socialists as we think about how to take it on.
We argue that the history of financialization has four distinct phases. First, a classical finance capital phase. Second, a managerial phase. Third, a neoliberal phase. And fourth, a current new finance capital phase. These phases form a cycle consisting of the decline and the gradual, uneven, and contradictory rebuilding of financial power. We show that these phases are marked not by sharp breaks, but rather by both continuity and change. Moreover, we show that each phase is punctuated by a major crisis managed by a relatively autonomous capitalist state acting in the general interests of capital.
The third argument that we make, and this comes directly out of the second, is that financialization does not signify the decline of capitalism. So obviously, I'm sure everybody in this room is all too aware that we're currently living through a serious range of social crises. We see, all kinds of social maladies associated with inequality, declining life expectancy, even in the case of the United States, for example, something that rarely happens in history outside of periods of warfare and pandemics and so on, even worse than COVID. And obviously, we're living through a serious environmental crisis in which we are facing a serious catastrophe unless we make very significant changes very soon. But that does not mean we're facing a crisis of capitalism. As a matter of fact, capitalism caused these crises and is benefiting from them, right? This is how capitalism functions. The disciplining of labor that led to the inequality that is so pronounced in the current period is not a problem for capital. Capital caused that, and capital is benefiting from it. In other words, there's this kind of argument that financialization means the system is broken and therefore needs to be fixed. What Scott and I are basically saying is that the system is working exactly as it should and therefore needs to be overthrown, right, and gotten rid of. And that's a very, very important difference, obviously. What we show in the book is that actually with the rise of finance, we see the rise of a more authoritarian state that is more closely integrated with the financial system, to the extent that following 2008, especially following the COVID-19 crisis in 2021, the difference between state power and private financial power has effectively been erased. And that where the state ends and the private financial system begins is hard to ascertain, right? The state stands behind and has effectively integrated state power with the core institutions and assets of the private financial system. So capitalists today kind of have the best of both worlds. They have a financial system that is in private hands, that is run based on profit maximization for private institutions, and yet is fully supported by the state. So I'm going to just wrap up by flagging what I think are three of the political implications, the most important political implications of this analysis, and why I think this book is so important politically. First is that if finance was parasitic on industry, that would lead us to conclude that workers should form an alliance with industrial firms, that is to say, their bosses, in order to rein in the real exploiters and the real parasites, who are the financial institutions. The second key argument we try to take on is this idea that there could be a worker alliance with finance around either the environment or fiscal expansion, right? You see this argument made a lot too, that with the rise of the big three asset management companies, what's often called asset manager capitalism, that these asset management firms, they have an interest in internalizing externalities in their portfolio firms. And so what that basically means is that they have an interest in fixing the environment, or that they're less worried about inflation than traditional financial institutions. And so workers can kind of form an alliance with this liberal financial bloc around new social policies, new fiscal programs, or perhaps fixing the climate crisis. And of course, as we show, that is simply not the case, right? The maximizing the competitiveness of the firms that they own means that they have no such interest in empowering workers or in undertaking costly measures to deal with the climate crisis and the green transition we so urgently need. The third key argument we try to take on, that the main problem with capitalism and the main thing we should be worried about is the need to restore competitiveness. That all these firms are monopolistic, and they're charging high prices, and they're not competing, so we need Elizabeth Warren to come in and break up the monopolies, and then consumers will benefit from this because prices will be reduced. And again, that's just, first of all, empirically wrong, because it is competitive and more competitive than ever before. But secondly, even if it weren't empirically wrong, this is really problematic, because intensifying competitiveness isn't good for workers. Workers have no interest in competitiveness. Competitiveness means pressure to cheapen commodities. It means pressure to reduce wages. And it means pressure to externalize environmental costs, right? Three of the major challenges that we face all would be worsened by a program to intensify competitiveness. So workers have no interest in that. So where does this leave us? Well, Scott and I make the case that we need to think about moving towards a system of democratic socialist planning. And we have some ideas in the book in the last chapter about how we might think about doing that. But it starts first and foremost with thinking about how to turn the financial system into a public utility, and to run it as a public utility, not as a for-profit concern. And to therefore move toward a situation in which we can allocate investment not based on maximizing profits for investors, but based on social need and environmental need. And that has to be the horizon for socialist politics today.